Hello, English learners, and welcome back to our another important podcast for mastering English fluency. I'm Adam, and today's episode is going to be something truly special.
That's right, Adam. Hi, everyone, I'm Sophia, and trust me when I say this, today's podcast isn't like any other you've heard before. We're going beyond the basics and diving into something that can instantly level up your English skills. Phrasal verbs.
You might be thinking, phrasal verbs? I've heard about them before. But hold on. What makes today's episode different is not just what we're teaching, but how we're teaching it. We're going to give you the top 10 phrasal verbs that English speakers use all the time, and we'll break them down with examples, stories, and tips that you won't forget.
Exactly. By the end of this episode, you won't just understand these phrasal verbs. You'll know how to use them confidently in your everyday conversations. And we've even got some fun activities planned along the way to make it interactive and memorable.
So whether you're commuting, relaxing at home, or going for a walk, stay tuned, because this is going to be more than a podcast. It's your ultimate guide to mastering phrasal verbs. Ready to jump in? Let's get started.
Let's start at the very beginning. What exactly are phrasal verbs? Simply put, a phrasal verb is a combination of a verb and one or more particles, such as a preposition or an adverb. Now, these little combinations can completely transform the meaning of the original verb. For instance, take the word run. On its own, it just means to move fast on your feet, right? But when you add the particle out, you get run out, which means something has been used up, like when you run out of milk or time. See how the meaning shifts? That's the magic and the challenge of phrasal verbs. They're incredibly flexible and add so much depth to English. And here's the thing, native speakers use them all the time. In fact, I'd say you can't have a natural conversation in English without coming across at least a few phrasal verbs. They're the lifeblood of casual conversational English. But why are phrasal verbs so common? It's because English, as a language, tends to simplify over time. Instead of creating completely new words for every concept, native speakers combine existing words to create phrases that are easy to use. That's why you'll hear people say things like put off instead of postpone or give up instead of surrender. It's more natural, more relatable, and quicker to say. However, this also means that phrasal verbs can be tricky for learners, especially because they're so context-dependent. Sometimes they're literal, like when I say, I'll take off my jacket. But other times they're idiomatic, like when I say the plane is taking off. And, of course, they can also be metaphorical, like, his career is really taking off. 3 meanings, same phrase. That's why phrasal verbs can be both exciting and overwhelming to learn.
Exactly, Sophia. And let me add to that. Phrasal verbs are one of the biggest hurdles English learners face. Why? Because they often don't follow any logical rules. A single phrasal verb can mean completely different things depending on how and where it's used. Let's take the example of breakdown. If I tell you, my car broke down, you understand that it stopped working. But if I say, he broke down after hearing the news, it means he became emotionally overwhelmed. And what if I say, let's break down the data in this report? Now, it means to analyze something in detail. One phrase, 3 very different uses. For learners, this can feel like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces don't always fit together. But here's the good news. Once you understand how phrasal verbs work and get familiar with the most common ones, they stop being intimidating and start feeling natural. And let's be honest, if you're serious about mastering English, you have to get comfortable with phrasal verbs. They're not just a part of the language, they're the backbone of how people actually speak. You'll hear them in casual conversations, movies, books, and even professional settings. Imagine you're at work, and your colleague says, we'll need to put off the meeting. If you don't understand put off, you might be completely lost. That's why phrasal verbs aren't just useful, they're essential. And here's a little secret. Once you start using them confidently, you'll notice how much more natural and fluent you sound. Native speakers will feel like you're one of them, just because you're using the same phrases they do. So trust me, Investing your time in learning phrasal verbs is 100% worth it.
Adam, you're absolutely right. And here's another reason phrasal verbs are so important. They help you express yourself more vividly. Think about the verb give. On its own, it's pretty straightforward, but when you combine it with particles, it comes alive. Give in means to surrender, give up means to quit, and give away means to reveal a secret or donate something. Just by adding a word or two, you completely change the meaning. And here's the fun part. Phrasal verbs are everywhere in English. They're in music lyrics, movies, and everyday conversations. For example, how many times have you heard someone say, "I'm running out of time," or "don't give up"? These phrases aren't just functional. They carry emotion and context that make them feel real and relatable. Let me give you one more example to highlight how versatile these verbs are. Think about the phrasal verb take off. If I say, "I'm taking off my shoes," the meaning is literal, I'm removing them. But if I say, "The plane is taking off at 5 p.m., the meaning changes completely. It's about a plane leaving the ground. And here's another one. His business is really taking off. That means it's becoming very successful. 3 meanings, same phrase. And this is why phrasal verbs can feel a bit overwhelming. They require you to understand the context. But don't worry. Throughout this episode, we're going to simplify things for you. We'll not only explain each phrasal verb, but also show you how to use it in real-life situations so that you can start practicing right away.
And that's the key, practice. The more you hear, read, and use phrasal verbs, the more natural they'll feel. By the end of this episode, you'll have 10 of the most essential phrasal verbs under your belt, along with practical examples and tips to use them confidently. Trust us, these verbs will open up a whole new level of understanding and fluency for you. So, if you're ready to master the art of phrasal verbs and transform your English, let's keep going. All right, let's dive into our first phrasal verb of the day, take off. Now, this is one of those versatile phrases that you'll hear all the time, and it has 3 very distinct meanings. The first and most literal one is removing something, usually clothes or accessories. For example, "It's so hot in here, I'm going to take off my jacket." Simple, right? But here's where it gets interesting. The second meaning is all about flying. You'll often hear this phrase at the airport, like when the flight attendant announces, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to take off." It's used to describe the moment a plane leaves the ground. And then there's the third meaning, which is metaphorical. When we say something is taking off, it means it's becoming very successful or popular. For instance, you could say, "Her YouTube channel really took off after she posted that viral video." 3 different uses, 1 powerful phrase.
Exactly, Adam. And what makes take off so fascinating is how naturally it fits into so many everyday situations. Let me give you a couple of examples from my own life. So, last week, I went to a friend's housewarming party. I walked in wearing this heavy coat because it was freezing outside. As soon as I got inside, I said, "Wow, it's warm in here. I need to take off my coat." That's the literal use. But here's a funnier story. Back in college, I once missed a flight because I got the time wrong. I remember standing at the airport gate watching the plane take off without me. I'll never forget that feeling of panic and regret. And of course, we all know someone whose career or project has taken off. A friend of mine started a small baking business during the pandemic, and now her Instagram is exploding with followers. Her business really took off, and she's doing amazing.
All right, listeners, now it's your turn to get involved. We've shared 3 meanings of take off, removing something, a plane leaving the ground, and something becoming successful. Let's see how well you can use them in your own sentences. Take a moment and think about how you'd use take off in a sentence for each meaning.
To help you out, here's a quick example. For the first meaning, as soon as I got home, I took off my shoes and relaxed. For the second meaning, our flight is scheduled to take off at 8 p.m. And for the third, her podcast really took off after she started interviewing famous guests. Now it's your turn. Create your sentences and don't be shy about saying them out loud. It's great practice.
And here's a tip. If you're learning with a friend, challenge each other to come up with different sentences. You could even write them down and share them with us later. Remember, the more you practice, the more natural these phrases will feel. So, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and make your own examples.
Let's move on to our second phrasal verb, break down. Now, this is one of those phrases that can take on a few different meanings depending on the context. The first meaning is the most common, when something stops working, like a machine or a vehicle. For example, my car broke down on the way to work. Here, it's clear that something has malfunctioned. You could also use it for any kind of equipment that's no longer functioning. Imagine you're in the middle of cooking and the blender suddenly breaks down. It's an incredibly frustrating moment. But breakdown isn't just limited to technical issues. It's also used when someone experiences an emotional collapse. For instance, you might say, "She broke down in tears after hearing the news." In this case, break down refers to a person who is so overwhelmed by emotion, they lose control, whether it's crying, yelling, or just shutting down entirely. The third meaning of breakdown is used in a more analytical sense, and this is one you'll often hear in academic or professional conversations. If someone says, "Let me break down the steps for you," they're going to explain things in detail, step by step, so you can understand everything clearly. This meaning is about taking something complex and simplifying it into manageable pieces. So, you can see how versatile this one little phrase can be. It can refer to a car or equipment malfunctioning, someone breaking down emotionally, or explaining something in a structured way. And I think that's what makes breakdown such a powerful and useful phrasal verb. It works in so many different contexts. If you can understand and use it properly, you'll sound much more like a native speaker, because this is one phrase that native speakers use often in a wide range of situations.
That's right, Sophia. And let's make sure everyone gets a chance to see how breakdown can be used in action. I want to role-play a little scenario to show you how flexible this phrase really is. Imagine you and I are talking about a difficult day. This is how the conversation might go. "Hey, Sophia, you look like you're having a rough time. What's going on?"
"Oh, Adam, it's been a day. First, my car broke down on the way to work, and I had to wait for over an hour for a tow truck.
"Oh no, that sounds frustrating. What happened next?"
Well, the worst part was that I couldn't even focus during my meeting. I just broke down right there in front of everyone when I heard some bad news. It was so embarrassing."
I totally get that. It sounds like everything was just piling up. But maybe you can break down the problem step by step and figure out a solution. Like, what needs to happen first?
"I guess I need to focus on getting my car fixed first. Then I'll deal with everything else. Thanks for helping me break it all down."
See how we used breakdown in 3 different ways in that dialogue? First, we used it to talk about the car malfunctioning. My car broke down. Then we used it to describe an emotional collapse. I broke down in front of everyone. And finally, we used breakdown to describe analyzing a situation and finding a solution. Let's break down the problem step by step. It's such a flexible phrase, and that's why it's important to really get comfortable with it.
Now let's focus on how to use breakdown in emotional situations. This is a particularly useful way to express empathy or describe someone going through a tough time. If you're talking about someone who's crying or overwhelmed, you can say, "She broke down in tears," or "He broke down after the breakup." It's a way to describe how a person is emotionally impacted by something intense. Maybe you've been there yourself, feeling like the weight of the world is too much, and suddenly you just can't hold it in anymore. Saying someone broke down really conveys how difficult and emotional the situation was. It's a powerful phrase, and it can really help you connect with others when describing how they're feeling. Now, here's a great way to add some extra detail when using breakdown in these emotional contexts. You can use phrases like "in tears," "with emotion," or "into laughter" to paint a clearer picture of what's happening. For example, she broke down in tears when she heard the news, or he broke down with emotion when he received the letter. This helps show exactly how the person is reacting, and it makes your conversation more vivid and expressive.
That's a great tip, Sophia. And remember, break down doesn't always have to be a negative thing. You can also use it in a lighter, even humorous context. Imagine you're with friends and they're telling a funny joke. You could say, "I just broke down laughing when I heard that joke," meaning you couldn't control your laughter. So it's a versatile phrase that you can use to describe not only tough moments, but also moments of pure joy and laughter. It's really about context.
Exactly, Adam. And that's the key to mastering phrasal verbs like break down, knowing how to use them in different situations. It's all about understanding the context and fitting the right meaning into the right moment. Keep practicing, and these phrasal verbs will start to feel like second nature.
Right. And before we move on to the next phrasal verb, remember, whether it's a car that's broken down, someone breaking down emotionally, or you breaking down a complex situation, break down is one of those phrases you'll find yourself using more and more. So, start using it in your conversations, and it'll soon feel like a natural part of your English.
Exactly. Stick with us because we've got more phrasal verbs to explore, and each one will make your English even more dynamic and natural. Let's keep going.
All right, moving on to the next phrasal verb, and this one is really useful for both personal and professional conversations. Get along. When we say someone gets along with someone else, we're talking about the quality of their relationship, specifically how well they get along. This means how well they work together, how well they communicate, and how friendly they are with each other. For example, if you say, "I really get along with my coworkers," it means you have a good relationship with them and you work well together. It's not just limited to coworkers, though. You can use it for any relationship, friends, family members, or even strangers. The opposite of get along would be not get along, which indicates a poor relationship or conflict.
Get along is a great way to talk about relationships in a positive or negative light. It's also important to know that this phrasal verb is used to describe people who are on good terms with one another. You can use it when talking about friendships, romantic relationships, family dynamics, basically any situation where people are interacting in a way that's either smooth and harmonious or difficult. So if you ever hear someone say, "We didn't get along at first, but now we're good friends," you'll know they're talking about how their relationship has improved over time.
That's right, Sophia. Now, let's take this phrasal verb to the next level by role-playing a conversation to show exactly how get along works in different situations. Picture this. I'm meeting someone for the first time, and I'm trying to learn about how they get along with their family. Here's how it might sound. "So, Sophia, I know you've got a big family. Do you get along with all of your siblings?"
Oh, for the most part, yes. We get along really well, actually. We have our disagreements like any family, but we always support each other in the end.
That's great. I know some people really struggle to get along with their family. What about your cousins?
Actually, my cousins and I didn't always get along when we were younger, but over the years we've become really close. It's funny how things change over time.
Now, did you notice how we used get along in two different contexts here? First, we talked about siblings. We get along really well, meaning they have a harmonious relationship. Then, we used it for cousins. We didn't always get along, meaning there was conflict in the past, but it's better now. So you can use get along to describe both positive and negative aspects of relationships, and it's super easy to remember.
Here's a quick tip for using get along in your own conversations. Pay attention to the context and make sure you know whether you're talking about a positive or negative relationship. If you're saying that you get along with someone, it means things are good between you and everything is smooth. But if you're talking about someone you don't get along with, you're highlighting some sort of tension or conflict. For example, "I get along with my friends" is saying everything is great, while "I don't get along with my neighbour" means there's some sort of disagreement or problem between you and that person. Another important point, sometimes we use get along in the past tense to describe how things were between two people. If you're talking about a time when you didn't get along with someone, you can say, "We didn't get along at first, but now things are better." This shows that your relationship improved over time.
Exactly, Sophia. And it's not just about family and friends. You can use this phrase at work too. For example, imagine you're in a job interview and the employer asks you about teamwork. You could say, "I get along well with my colleagues and we collaborate on projects all the time." It shows that you're easy to work with and that you have strong interpersonal skills. Or let's say you're working with a difficult coworker. You might say, "I didn't get along with him at first, but we found a way to work together." It's a great way to express improvement and the willingness to resolve conflict.
Exactly. Get along is such a practical and powerful phrasal verb to use in all kinds of conversations. Whether you're talking about personal relationships, professional situations, or just explaining how things are going with someone, it's a great way to show the dynamic between people. And, just like any other phrasal verb, the more you practice using it, the more natural it will feel.
Absolutely. So here's your challenge. Try using get along in your conversations today. Think about your friends, family, or coworkers. Are there people you get along with really well? Or maybe you've had some challenges with someone, but things are getting better? Use get along to describe those relationships, and you'll notice how much more confident you sound.
And stay tuned because we've got even more phrasal verbs coming your way, each one designed to help you express yourself even more naturally and clearly. So keep practicing and let's get along with our next chapter.
All right, let's dive into the next phrasal verb, put off. This one is extremely common and has two main meanings that are both really useful in everyday conversation. The first meaning is when we talk about postponing or delaying something. For example, if you say, "I had to put off my meeting until next week," you're saying that you delayed it or rescheduled it for a later time. It's all about shifting something to a future time, usually because it can't be done right away. Another way you can use put off is to describe when you lose interest in something or someone. For instance, if you say, "I was really excited about the idea, but after hearing all the details, it really put me off." It means the information made you lose interest or enthusiasm. So, this phrasal verb can describe both delaying something and losing interest. Now, the interesting thing about put off is that it's often associated with procrastination. That's when you keep delaying or postponing something, often because you're not looking forward to doing it or you're feeling a little bit lazy. It's definitely a phrase that comes up when you're talking about tasks that people are avoiding. If you ever find yourself saying, "I'll do it tomorrow," or "I'll do it later," that's exactly what put off means, pushing something aside for another time, sometimes indefinitely.
Oh, Adam, I couldn't agree more. And honestly, if there's one thing that people are really good at, it's putting things off, especially important tasks. For example, I'm notorious for putting off doing my laundry. I mean, I know it's important, but I just hate doing it. So I tell myself, "I'll do it later," and then it becomes, "I'll do it tomorrow." And before I know it, I'm standing there with no clean socks. It's such a classic example of procrastination, and that's exactly what put off means. We're delaying something because we're not ready to deal with it, or sometimes we just don't feel like it. I can even remember a time when I put off doing an assignment for days. I kept telling myself, "I'll start it in the evening," but it never happened. I just kept putting it off. And then, the deadline was right around the corner. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that feeling of putting something off until the very last minute. It's almost like you're trying to avoid it as long as possible, but in the end, it just makes everything worse.
Exactly, Sophia. And that's the funny thing about procrastination. We often think we're saving ourselves time or avoiding something unpleasant, but in reality, we just end up with more stress in the end. We all know that feeling, telling ourselves, "I'll put it off for now," and then suddenly realizing it's way too late to do anything about it. It's like we're tricking ourselves into thinking there's always more time, but we're just creating a bigger problem for ourselves down the road. And that brings me to another interesting part of put off. It's not always about procrastination, though. Sometimes you might put something off because you need more time to think about it or plan it out. For example, if you're deciding whether to take a new job or move to a new city, you might say, "I've decided to put it off for now until I figure out my next steps." In this case, you're postponing the decision, but for a more thoughtful reason rather than just avoiding it.
So, now we want to hear from you, our listeners. We've all been there, putting things off. Whether it's a task, a decision, or just something you don't feel like dealing with right now, we want to know. What have you been putting off lately? Send us your stories and let's share some laughs about it. Maybe you've been avoiding cleaning out your closet, or maybe you've been putting off organizing your files. Whatever it is, we want to hear from you. And here's a little challenge for you. Try to pick one thing that you've been putting off and actually do it today. It doesn't have to be huge, just one task. We can all use a little motivation to stop procrastinating and start getting things done. So, after listening to this episode, let's all take a small step together and stop putting things off.
Great challenge, Sophia. Remember, we all put things off, and it's something that we can definitely relate to. But once you start breaking the habit of postponing things, it can really make a difference in how you feel and how much you get done. So, whether it's tackling something small like cleaning your desk or something bigger like organizing your life, the key is to stop putting it off and take action. All right, before we wrap up this chapter, let's quickly recap. Put off means postponing something, usually to a later time. It's the classic procrastination phrase, but it can also be used when you lose interest or when you need more time to decide something. So, whether you're avoiding laundry, putting off a phone call, or postponing a big life decision, put off is a phrase you'll hear and use often.
All right, moving on to our next phrasal verb, run out. This one is super useful, especially when you're talking about things that finish or are used up. When you run out of something, it means you no longer have any of it left. This could be anything from supplies to food to time. For example, you might say, "I ran out of milk," meaning you no longer have any milk left in the fridge, or "We've run out of time," meaning there's no more time to finish what you were doing. It's pretty straightforward, but it's used all the time in everyday conversations. Running out of things is something we all experience, so this phrasal verb is a must-know. And it's not just limited to physical things like groceries or materials. You can also run out of abstract things, like energy, patience, or ideas. So, for example, "I've run out of patience with this project," means you're no longer able to tolerate it or handle it. It's all about the idea of something coming to an end or being exhausted. All right, moving on to our next phrasal verb, run out. This one is super useful, especially when you're talking about things that finish or are used up. When you run out of something, it means you no longer have any of it left. This could be anything from supplies to food to time. For example, you might say, "I ran out of milk," meaning you no longer have any milk left in the fridge. Or, "We've run out of time," meaning there's no more time to finish what you were doing. It's pretty straightforward, but it's used all the time in everyday conversations. Running out of things is something we all experience, so this phrasal verb is a must-know. And it's not just limited to physical things like groceries or materials. You can also run out of abstract things like energy, patience, or ideas. So, for example, "I've run out of patience with this project," means you're no longer able to tolerate it or handle it. It's all about the idea of something coming to an end or being exhausted.
Exactly. Now, let's make this more relatable. Imagine this scenario. It's a busy Monday morning, and you're rushing to get everything done before heading to work. You're making your coffee, trying to get a quick breakfast in, and suddenly, bam, you realize you've run out of coffee. There's no coffee left in the house, and now you're running late, stressed, and facing a day ahead without your usual caffeine boost. Have you ever been there, Sophia?
Oh, definitely. That's the worst feeling. Running out of coffee is like running out of fuel in the middle of a long drive. You're just not ready to take on the day without it. I've definitely had those moments where I'm halfway through making breakfast and I realize I've run out of something essential, like eggs or butter, and I just have to quickly adjust or figure out an alternative. It's frustrating, but at the same time, it's just part of life.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of the phrasal verb, run out. It's a simple way to describe that feeling of suddenly realizing you have no more of something you need, whether it's something as essential as coffee or just a random supply you didn't expect to run out of. It's one of those situations that can throw off your whole day, but you just have to deal with it.
Now, let's talk about how run out is used in different cultures and expressions. Many cultures have sayings or idioms that are similar to run out. For instance, in English we have the expression, time flies when you're having fun, which is essentially a way of saying, we ran out of time. You know that feeling when you're enjoying yourself so much that you don't even realize the time passing? Suddenly you look at the clock and, whoops, time's run out. Another fun cultural expression is in Japanese, isho kenmei, which translates to with all your might, often used when you've run out of energy or strength. It's a way of saying, I've done all I can, but now I have nothing left. It's interesting how different languages express this idea of running out of something, whether it's time, energy, or resources.
That's so interesting, Sophia. And in Spanish, you might hear someone say, se me acabó, which means, I ran out of something. It's very commonly used when you've used up everything you had, whether it's money, patience, or even a snack you were enjoying. I've heard it many times when someone is trying to explain that they just didn't expect to run out of something so soon. Adam continues, these cultural expressions really show how universally we experience running out of things. Whether it's in a stressful situation where you've run out of time, or a lighthearted moment when you've run out of snacks, we all face these moments in our lives. And knowing how to use run out in English helps you connect with others when they're sharing similar experiences.
Exactly. So, to recap, run out simply means to use up all of something, whether it's tangible items like coffee or abstract things like time or patience. It's a super versatile phrasal verb that comes up all the time, and now you've got it covered in a variety of contexts.
Yes, and the more you use run out in your own conversations, the more natural it will feel. So, whether you're talking about running out of time during a meeting or realizing you've run out of your favorite snack, just remember this simple phrase, and you'll sound like a native speaker in no time. All right, let's jump into the next phrasal verb, look after. This one is all about taking care of someone or something. If you say you look after someone, it means you take responsibility for them and ensure their well-being. You might look after a friend who's not feeling well, a pet, or even something like your home or garden. It's essentially about being responsible for someone or something's needs. It's a caring, protective action, like a caregiver watching over someone or making sure everything is okay. For example, if your parents go away on vacation, you might need to look after your younger sibling. Or, if you're in charge of a pet, you're looking after them by feeding them, taking them for walks, and making sure they're comfortable. So, look after is about nurturing and being there for others, whether they're people, animals, or even things like plants that need attention.
Exactly, Adam. Look after is a phrase we use in so many different contexts, from taking care of family members to ensuring our pets are happy and healthy. I think we all know how important it is to look after the people we care about. For example, when a family member is sick, you might say, I'm going to look after them until they feel better. Or, if your pet is injured, you might say, I'm looking after my dog while he recovers. It's that nurturing role you take on when someone or something needs help. Of course, look after isn't limited to just people and pets. It also applies to responsibilities. For instance, if you're in charge of something at work, you might be asked to look after a project or a team. It's all about managing things to make sure they're running smoothly. Or maybe you're looking after your own health, which could mean eating better, exercising, and getting enough rest. It's not just about looking after others, It's also about taking care of yourself and your own responsibilities.
Let's make this a bit more fun by role-playing a conversation. Imagine we're siblings and I'm asking you to look after something important for me while I'm away. Here's how that conversation might go. Hey, Sophia, I'm going to be out of town for a few days for work. Can you look after the house while I'm gone?
Of course, no problem. What exactly do you need me to do?
Well, just make sure everything's locked up and safe, and water the plants every other day. Also, could you feed the cat and make sure she's okay?
Got it. I'll water the plants and make sure the cat gets her meals. I'll also keep an eye on everything else to make sure nothing goes wrong. You don't have to worry about anything.
Thanks so much, Sophia. I really appreciate it. You know, I'm glad I can count on you to look after things when I'm not around.
No worries, Adam. I'm happy to help. You just focus on your work trip and I'll handle things here.
Now, did you notice how we used look after in different ways during that conversation? First, I asked Sophia to look after the house while I'm away, which means I'm trusting her to take care of the property and make sure everything is safe. Then, I asked her to look after the plants and the cat, which is a more specific task of caring for living things. It's a great example of how look after can be used in various situations.
Exactly, Adam. And this is something I'm sure many people can relate to. If you've ever had to look after a younger sibling or even an older relative, it's all about being responsible and taking care of their needs. Sometimes you're looking after someone emotionally, like when you lend a listening ear to a friend going through a tough time. Other times it's about being physically present, like helping out at home with chores or running errands for a family member who's not feeling well. Sophia continues, also don't forget that looking after things doesn't always mean doing things for others. Sometimes it's about making sure things are in good shape. For example, you might look after your car by getting regular maintenance, or look after your finances by budgeting and saving. It's about taking the necessary actions to ensure everything continues to run smoothly.
That's such a great point, Sophia. It's all about being responsible and doing what's needed to keep things in order, whether it's people, pets, or tasks. And just like look after, you can also use it in other ways, like looking after yourself. For instance, if you're stressed, it's important to look after your mental health by taking breaks, practicing self-care, or seeking support when you need it. So, in addition to looking after others, don't forget that self-care is just as important.
We'd love to hear from you, our listeners. What do you look after in your life? Maybe you're the one who looks after your pets, or you've taken on the responsibility of looking after a family member. Or maybe you're really good at looking after your own well-being. Share with us how you take care of the things and people around you, and we might even feature your responses in the next episode. Remember, looking after someone or something doesn't always have to be a huge task. It's about being responsible and caring in whatever way is needed. Whether it's your home, your health, or the people you love, look after is a phrase that really shows your commitment to the well-being of others.
So, to wrap up, look after is a versatile phrasal verb used for taking care of people, pets, responsibilities, and even yourself. It's a phrase that speaks to our role in caring for others and maintaining the things in our lives. Whether you're looking after your family, your job, or your mental health, it's all about keeping things safe, happy, and healthy.
Exactly. So, take a moment today to think about what you need to look after in your life and make sure you're taking care of it. Whether big or small, it all counts. Keep practicing look after in your conversations and stay tuned as we continue exploring more phrasal verbs in our next chapter. Let's dive into our next phrasal verb, turn down. This one is all about rejecting or refusing something, whether it's an offer, an invitation, or a request. You might use it when you don't want to accept an offer, when you're not interested in a proposal, or when you can't agree to a certain request. For example, if someone offers you a job and you don't want to take it, you might say, I had to turn down the job offer. Or, if someone invites you to a party and you don't want to go, you can say, I had to turn down the invitation because I had other plans. It's a really common phrase when talking about saying no to something, but it's often used in a polite or respectful way. One thing to keep in mind when using turn down is that it's not just about being negative or rejecting something without reason. It can often be used in situations where you might have to politely decline an offer or request. So you could turn down a job offer because it doesn't align with your goals. Or turn down an invitation because you're busy, but you don't want to offend anyone.
Exactly, Sophia. And you're right, turn down is usually a polite way of rejecting something, which is why we use it so often. It's not a harsh or rude phrase. It's more about explaining that you're not interested or available while still being respectful. Let me tell you a funny personal story about being turned down and turning down something. I remember once I was at a friend's party, and they offered me a drink. I was trying to be healthy and didn't want anything sugary, so I politely turned it down. But my friend kept insisting, "Come on, just one drink." I kept saying, "No thanks, I'm good." It was funny, because the more I turned it down, the more persistent they became. In the end, I had to literally run away from the drink offer. But that's the thing with turning things down. It can sometimes feel awkward, especially when someone keeps pushing, but it's totally okay to stand your ground and politely say no. And on the flip side, I've also been turned down a few times in life. I remember when I applied for a job that I really wanted, and after the interview, I waited eagerly for a response. A week later, I received the email. "We regret to inform you that we've decided to move forward with other candidates." It was disappointing, but at the same time, I understood that they had to make a decision. It's just part of life. Sometimes you get turned down, and that's okay. You just have to keep moving forward and stay positive.
Oh, Adam, that story is so relatable. Getting turned down can be tough, especially when you really want something, but it's all part of the process. Whether it's turning something down yourself or being turned down, it's about learning how to handle rejection gracefully. It's important to remember that saying no is sometimes necessary, whether it's about rejecting a job, a date, or even a request for your time. And, as you said, it doesn't have to be rude or harsh. You can always turn something down politely, and that's what makes turn down such a useful phrase. Of course, sometimes we also turn things down because they just aren't the right fit. It's not about rejecting them for the sake of rejecting them. It's about knowing what works for you. For example, let's say you're offered a job that's too far from home. You might say, "I had to turn down the job offer because the commute would be too long for me." It's not a negative rejection, it's just about recognizing what's best for you.
Now let's do a little activity for our listeners. Imagine you've just received a job offer, but after considering it carefully, you've decided not to accept it. How would you politely turn down the offer? Think about how you can do this in a way that leaves the door open for future opportunities. Here's an example. "Thank you so much for the offer, but after careful consideration, I've decided to pursue another opportunity that aligns better with my career goals." That's polite, clear, and respectful.
Exactly, Adam. It's all about showing appreciation for the opportunity while still being firm in your decision. Another way you could politely turn down a job offer might be, "I'm really grateful for the offer, but after careful thought, I've decided to decline. I hope we can keep in touch for future opportunities." See? It's respectful, considerate, and keeps the door open for later. Sophia continues. So, now it's your turn, listeners. How would you politely turn down a job offer? Send us your responses and let's see how you would handle this kind of situation. We'll feature some of your responses in our next episode.
Great exercise, Sophia. It's always important to know how to turn down offers or requests in a polite, respectful manner. Whether it's rejecting a job offer, turning down an invitation, or even saying no to a favor, it's essential to communicate clearly and graciously. So, to wrap up, turn down is a very versatile phrasal verb. You can use it when rejecting offers, invitations, or requests, and it's always important to do so politely and with respect. Whether it's about saying no to a job, a party invite, or a favor, it's a phrase that helps you navigate tricky situations with grace.
Exactly. So remember, it's not about being negative, it's about choosing what's best for you and doing so in a way that's respectful to others. Thanks for tuning in today, and stay with us as we continue exploring more useful phrasal verbs in the next chapter.
All right, let's get into the next phrasal verb, set up. This is a super versatile phrase that can be used in a variety of contexts. At its core, set up means to establish, arrange, or organize something. You can use it when you're starting a new project, arranging a meeting, or even setting up an event. For example, if you're creating a new online account, you might say, "I'm going to set up a new email account today." Or if you're arranging a meeting with someone, you could say, "I'll set up a meeting at 3 o'clock. Meeting for us to discuss the project." So, it's all about organizing or establishing something, whether it's physical, like setting up a room for an event, or more abstract, like setting up a schedule. It's also worth noting that set up can refer to the preparation or arrangement of something. For example, when you're setting up a new office space, you might need to arrange furniture and make sure everything's in its proper place. Similarly, you can set up a meeting by scheduling a time, choosing a location, and confirming with the attendees. In business, setting up meetings and events is a huge part of staying organized and making sure things go smoothly.
Exactly. Set up is one of those phrasal verbs that you'll use frequently in both personal and professional settings. In business, it's especially important. For example, if you're organizing a conference, you could say, "I'm going to set up the registration desk." Or if you're arranging a team meeting, you might say, "I'll set up the Zoom call for our virtual meeting tomorrow." So set up is perfect for describing the process of organizing anything that needs to be put together or planned in advance. On a personal level, set up can apply to a lot of things too. For instance, if you're planning a party or gathering, you might say, "I need to set up the decorations and food for the party." Or, if you're planning a date, you could say, "I'll set up a dinner reservation for us." It's really a go-to phrase for anything that requires some kind of preparation or arrangement, from work meetings to casual get-togethers.
Exactly, Sophia. You can see how this phrase applies to so many different situations. Whether it's business or personal, set up is about making sure everything is arranged and ready to go. It's about getting things prepared ahead of time. And let's face it, in today's fast-paced world, being organized and setting things up in advance is super important, both at work and in our personal lives. And here's a pro tip for you. Using setup in your emails can make you sound more professional and organized. For example, instead of saying, "I want to arrange a meeting," you could say, "I'd like to set up a meeting for next week." It sounds more polished and efficient. Or, if you're helping someone with their schedule, you might write, "Let me set up a time for us to connect." So, using setup in emails can make you come across as confident, proactive, and in control. Important qualities in the professional world.
I love that tip, Adam. Using setup in business emails is definitely a great way to sound more polished and professional. It's a simple yet effective phrase that helps convey action and preparation. If you're sending an email about scheduling a meeting, for example, saying something like, "I've set up the meeting for Thursday at 3 p.m., makes it clear that you're on top of things and have already organized the details. It gives the impression that you're proactive and capable. And on the flip side, when someone asks you to set something up, it shows that they trust you to organize and arrange things properly. It's a phrase that conveys responsibility and leadership, which are key in professional settings.
Let's look at how you might use setup in a conversation. Imagine you're talking to a colleague about organizing a meeting for an upcoming project. "Hey, Sophia, we need to discuss the new project. Can you set up a meeting for us next week?"
Sure, Adam. I'll check the team's availability and set up a time for the meeting. How about Wednesday afternoon?
Sounds great. Thanks for setting that up. I'll make sure to have the agenda ready by then.
Perfect. I'll send out the invites and set up the Zoom link for the meeting. See you then.
As you can see, setup here is used for organizing a meeting and getting everything prepared. It's clear, efficient, and shows that Sophia is taking the lead in arranging the logistics. It's a phrase that adds clarity and professionalism to the conversation.
And the great thing about set up is that it's flexible. Whether you're talking about setting up an event, a meeting, or even setting up your own home office, It always conveys the idea of organizing and preparing things in advance. It's one of those phrasal verbs that just makes your life easier when you need to explain what needs to be arranged.
Now we want to hear from you. How have you used set up in your own life? Maybe you've set up a meeting with a colleague or helped set up an event. Or perhaps you've had to set up something at home, like your new phone or a piece of furniture. Share your experiences with us. We'll feature some of your responses in our next episode.
That's right. Set up is such a useful and versatile phrase that can be applied in so many different situations. We can't wait to hear how you've used it in your own lives, whether at work, at home, or in your personal projects. Don't forget, set up is one of those phrasal verbs that helps you sound professional and organized, so keep practicing it.
So, to summarize, set up is a fantastic phrasal verb that you'll use when you're talking about organizing, arranging, or preparing something. It's essential in both business and personal contexts, and using it in your emails or conversations can make you sound more polished and proactive.
Exactly. Keep using setup to stay organized and professional, whether you're arranging meetings, setting up events, or even just making sure everything's in order in your daily life. That's all for today's episode. We hope you enjoyed learning these essential phrasal verbs and feel ready to use them in your conversations. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, share this podcast, and keep practicing. We'll see you in the next episode.